Hi, welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Well, that was a really fascinating discussion with Chuck Kelly, the co-founder and CEO of Mavati Athletic, and listening to him and how COVID-19 restrictions have negatively impacted his business was sobering. I've had, in addition, the privilege of interviewing numerous different restaurateurs and store owners in Port Credit, in Toronto, Mississauga, etc. And I really worry that the economic devastation, the personal devastation that the closures are causing is something that we just don't realize and haven't taken into account, and governments haven't taken into account as much as they should. I think, unquestionably, there's been a public health crisis. There has been some attention to the employment issues and the mental health crisis as people have talked about divorces increasing or babies increasing, one or the other, depending on whether people get along during a pandemic and isolation or don't get along. But I'm not sure if there's been enough attention to the economic catastrophe and personal economic catastrophe that I think these closures are going to have for so many people. And it's jobs, yes, no question, and that's terrible. Lots of people have been laid off. Lots of people have had to take wage cuts. Lots of people have been furloughed. Lots of people have lost their jobs. But in addition, I think that there is a looming, unprecedented amount of bankruptcies that have not occurred probably since 2008, 2009, and maybe even worse than that. And I see it as I drive down some of the main streets in our community where there's so many for lease signs up, there's so many closed signs up, there's so many stores that have been boarded up. And I really worry about this. I interviewed somebody who told me that they had a couple of locations and they had incurred almost $1 million in debt. This was a business that they had created over time, that it was left to them by their parents, that they had to close down a couple of times. They had landlords that weren't willing to take the rent reductions. They wanted to keep going. They felt obliged to their employees, and they've incurred $1 million in debt. And they have no idea how they're going to get out of their situation. And really the only way out of their situation is either governments come in and bail them out, or to declare bankruptcy. And I think there's going to be a lot of people that are facing that kind of situation. And I think we're in this situation for a couple of reasons. And, I've really been struggling this, and I almost wonder at times whether this is sort of like the way that you sometimes raise children, that sometimes you got to be tough and sometimes you got to be lenient and make sure that the children become adults or almost adults and they take care of themselves. I worry that initially governments weren't stringent enough. And I've reminded of a bunch of the public health people that you've probably heard interview and that I've had the honor of interviewing that have talked about, the vaccine is important, but too much of us have been waiting and hoping and putting all of our plans and hopes on a vaccine, when in fact 6 feet of distance, or for sure 9 feet of distance, 1.5 meters, almost assures us 100% of not getting the virus. So physical distancing really works well. Particularly outside, but even more so inside. And then second of all, the masks, both for yourself as well as for the other person, dramatically reduce the rate of infection almost completely. Where lots of people have said, if we for a month or 6 weeks had 100% attention to physical distancing and mask wearing, the virus wouldn't be able to find new hosts, wouldn't be able to infect new people, and would, by definition, die off. I don't think we did that as well. I have to add to that. I think that particularly during the spring and summer and early fall, outside, where it's very difficult, if not almost impossible, based on all the people I've talked to and the statistics and articles that I've read, to catch the virus, and or very dramatically improved ventilation, with whether it's just open windows or better HVAC systems or whatnot. And then finally, better testing, contact tracing, and isolation when we find people that had the virus. I don't think we did a good enough job on all of that. And the proof is in the fact that the second wave came back in Canada and the second and third wave came back in the United States. So I think that we haven't done as good a job as we could have. And people say, well, we're not authoritarian governments like you've got in South Korea or China or Hong Kong or Singapore that did an incredibly good job of enforcing mask wearing, physical distancing, contact tracing, isolation, etc. But you know what? Australia and New Zealand did a really good job, and they're democratic countries just like us, and countries that respect freedom and individual rights. But for the collective good, they instituted more stringent measures and did a far better job. And so I think that we could have and should have done a far more stringent job initially. And, for those people that said we should do, herd immunity and allow the virus to spread, the answer is out in Sweden, where Sweden did that, have done okay from an economic standpoint and an infection rate until the last couple of months. And then recently, as you probably know, the other Nordic countries for the first time since World War II have closed their borders to Sweden because Sweden is out of control. And the herd immunity let it run strategy has resulted in the worst mortality and infection rates per capita in all of the Nordic countries. So we could have followed the example of New Zealand and Australia, and we for sure would have seen the opposite example of what's not working in Sweden and, frankly, some of the United States, particularly the southern United States, that closed too late and opened too early and didn't follow good public health reasons. That said, just with children, you can't keep the rules on forever. You can't keep the timeout on forever. You can't keep the curfew or the or whatever the rules are on forever. You've got to, at some point in time, allow people to grow up and act responsibly. I really worry that what is happening today is got unbelievable consequences that we just have not fathomed. I think that the negative impact economically on small business, restaurants, gyms, athletic clubs, spas, small retail stores, et cetera, and not just on main streets, but also in malls, is crazy. It's going to be unparalleled. And that we allow the big stores to open up. And you and I have both been in those big stores where, yeah, people maybe respect physical distancing, but there's a lot of people and they're not following the directions on the floor, and they're crowded by the cash registers, and you just don't know. And I think the statistics that people are getting infections from stores. And it's almost like the unintended consequence. As we close down a bunch of the other places to go to, people are forced to congregate in the places that are still open and allowed to go to. And so therefore, we're by definition making it worse. And we're also doing it in regards to closing Toronto and Peel. I've gone to Halton, to Oakville, to Burlington, and the restaurants, the stores, the malls are packed because people from Toronto and Mississauga and elsewhere are leaving where they're closed and going to the places where they're open. And so we're forcing people into less places. And wouldn't it be far better if we opened up more places and allowed people to spread out and be farther away from one another? I'm reminded of back in the summer when we closed the parking lots on parks, and the parks that were open and the sidewalks and the streets were crowded because people ended up going to places where they could go. People still needed to get out. They still needed to do stuff. And so the unintended consequence of closing some places is people get together too often in the places that remain. And so I really worry that what we needed to do is we needed to tell stores, restaurants, et cetera, that you could open up. They've put in plexiglass. They've put in cleanliness standards. They've put in public health rules and education with their staff. We could have, for sure, enforced masks. We could have ensured physical distancing. We could have ensured that 1 or 2 family units or bubbles were at maximum at every table, 4 to 6 people or whatever it is at a table in a restaurant. But to close them all and force the people that are remaining into the restaurants that are still open, and or the malls and or the big box stores that are still open is wrong. And the way around the rules where a Dollarama or a liquidation store can remain open because they sell a little bit of food just calls into question people's confidence in the government's structure and the systems. So I think what we need to do now is open up. I think what we need to do is open up with public health respect. I think what government should do is open up restaurants at 30 to 50% capacity with masks, with physical distancing, and open up the stores with 30% to 50% capacity and all those other rules. We need to distribute people more widely, not allow them to accumulate in the big grocery stores or the big box stores or in the communities that are still open. I'll give you one example. I go and buy my meat at a small local butcher, and maximum I've ever seen in that store are 2 or 3 people. I feel far more comfortable there than I do in the big grocery stores, because there's only 2 or 3 people in that store. And there's got to be lots of local stores that, if there's only a few people in them at a time, are safer than a whole bunch of people crowding into a big box. So I think this is a public health crisis, that we weren't stringent enough initially, and then we didn't allow people to open up and do so respecting their ability to make smart decisions today. And I think it is a economic crisis that we have not seen how bad it's going to be. I think that the unemployment and the bankruptcies and the companies that survive, but with huge amounts of debt that are a millstone around their neck for a long period of time, are going to be tragic. And I think it's a mental health crisis, as people have dealt with isolation, have dealt with lots of jobs, have dealt with the problems of the economic collapse of their businesses. And I think it could have been dealt with better. And we've seen those examples in Australia and New Zealand, not even thinking about the authoritarian states that can be criticized. We've seen those examples. We could have done and should have done a better job. And I'm really worried about what's going to end up happening. And I encourage all of you to shop local, because they need your support more today than ever before. Anyway, that's my thoughts on this issue. Brian Crombie for the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, Saga 960. I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. And you can get all my podcasts and videocasts on my website, briancrombie.com. My thoughts for the night. Thanks.